the casting scene. Let's start. Hello guys, welcome to this best of 3 TVT. You know I'm gonna choose Terran most of the time. Sorry guys, it's just the funnest race to watch. Just no other correct opinion besides that one. But this one is special for another reason other than just having double the Terran. We'll get into that in a second. Because in the bottom left, you know this guy pretty darn well. It is OG's, O Gaming's Innovation. In the top right, this is why it's so special. It is the Blue Terran Dead Pixels Fantasy. Return to Dead Pixels after a little over 2 years absence, I guess. Let me just fix the keyboard here. And was basically instantly picked back up by his old team, Dead Pixels. So that's really cool to see. The Fantasy is a very old player. That sounded kind of rude, I guess, but now he's been playing for a long time. He played back in Brood War. He was actually very good at Brood War. Really, really, really good. He was the finalist of the final OSL, I believe it was, as well as helped SKT to one of the final pro leagues of pure Brood War by defeating Flash. So that's right, like he actually defeated Flash, who is a very hard person to beat. But he lost to Zombi, so I guess he didn't win OSL, so that kind of sucks. But anyways, he's just a well-established player. Was well on SKT for a very long time, including into StarCraft 2 before Kespa disbanded and there's no longer an SKT team. But he was a fun player to watch, alright? Like, I'm gonna just gush over this guy for about 4 minutes here, so just let me do it. The Fantasy is such a fun player to watch. We all know Gumiho can be a very weird player. We know that MMA has some map abusive builds, TY2, that's all well and good, but Fantasy also had ideas about different compositions. He was one of the first guys to try and force StarCraft 2 to be a little like Brood War, and he wanted to do a bio to mech transition in StarCraft 2. Spoiler, it didn't really work out. He did use it in StarCraft 2 Pro League. It did not really do so well. I think he won maybe one game with it, but if I recall correctly, he kind of like already got in a good position, so it didn't really count. So he just is a fun player to watch, micro-wise, build order-wise, composition-wise. He has some new ideas to bring to the table. He never just wants to stay in his comfort zone. But it's interesting because he is coming back into the game, and that's usually what you want to do when you get back into it. If you want to be good anyways. Like if you want to get back into it and just, you know, be gold forever on a ladder, then I guess do whatever the hell you want, right? But if you want to improve and you want to learn quickly what people are doing in this brand new expansion that Fantasy has never touched, then you usually are going to just stick to something that's very safe. So I'm curious to see how Fantasy will play because I did not get to watch him play at Home Story Cup, of which this is from, which the replays are released if you want to check them out yourself. There's a ton of replays because they did a group style format, so a lot of games were played. These are Home Story Cup matches. Yes, these are Home Story Cup replays that were released. This was in Group D or something like that, I believe. Yeah. So anyways, so, you know, people who've actually watched Home Story Cup, I think they know how this goes down, but I don't. Plus, because it was a group format, it's kind of more difficult to say exactly how it went down. You know, like, because there's about 8 people in this group or whatever, it doesn't mean that just because he beat Innovation, for instance, he actually beats him here, I don't know, that he would advance on, and oh boy, that's a spoiler, I already knew that. Well, that's not how it's gonna work today, so I don't know who wins this. I know Innovation gets out of the group, but I don't know if Fantasy did or anything else. Which is nice, because sometimes you want to seem like a genius as a caster, and you do like when you get to watch replays that you know the result of, because you're just like, he doesn't win this game, guys. Trust me, even if he's in a fantastic position. But other times you also want to be intrigued and interested in the results, as opposed to just knowing them. It looks like Fantasy is liking the Cyclone opener for this game at the very least. It is a standard safe opener. Both of them opened up on that one base, very quickly went to the command center. I mean, some similarities in this build, but very different on what they're actually building. The Reaper of Fantasy is going to get into the main base and see that it is going into Bio, so that's a nice catch, although Innovation is mostly known for Bio, it's not that surprising. But also that it is already going into it, you know, there's no pit stop around Banshees, although there was a Raven made, and no weird 2-base tank push coming his way or something like that. No, it's going into what is standard production of Marines, tanks, and medevacs. Now on Fantasy side, Fantasy hasn't really chosen what composition he wants to go for. We won't know for sure until he gets like stim or extra barracks, but I'm fairly sure he'll go for bio. Mech is not too popular in TVT nowadays. This is a nice little cyclone drop. Picks up a cyclone and then picks up his cyclones. Who'd have thunk that cyclone is in range of that tank? But it's a nice drop to do. If you're confused about TVT and you're looking for a safer build, then it can almost tell you this is like the safest one. I think it was a factory expand with cyclones. That's going to protect you against a lot of things. It also provides you some scouting and some harassment, as long as you can control a medevac. But these tank positions are very, very good as he grabs that cyclone that came out first. Raven was probably also going to look for something to be done there, but a little too slow. Third command center already on the way, on location. And it's Fantasy who's doing the kind of awkward tank push. I say this is awkward because it's actually not quite awkward yet. You still have time to abuse the situation at hand. But as TVT rolls on and you get stim or someone just gets a lot of Marines, when you do a tank push like this Liberator's doing some good work. You're hoping not to be scouted, basically, because if you're caught, you know, with a concave of Marines and you only have one tank and half a dozen of your own, it doesn't look very good. But if you get into an abusive position, maybe your tank's over here, I just puts it right there, whatever, then it actually kind of like cements itself and becomes very difficult for the person to break, even if they do eventually finish stim and combat shields. So Fantasy is not going to be broken before we get to set up. So this is turning into a bit of a nice contain. His third C is going to get up and running with no problem. He will be, I think, well aware of the potential for medevacs as time goes on. The star port's ready to go. And he'll be a little worried about counterattacks. But for right now, I think he knows he has innovation in his grip. So now he starts stim. So it's like a good minute behind. And that's substantial. That could be enough for him to be screwed over in a fight later on. But this is doing some okay damage. Delaying a third command center even is pretty good. But there are those two drops. I guess I missed them being produced, but that's exactly what I was talking about. Like, eventually you have to worry. They'll just send 60 Marines across the map because their bioproduction has been better than yours for quite some time. This is with stim, and that tank is not siege. The other one is, though. With 3 tanks, in fact, that will not be a problem. The scan of the natural probably reveals Fantasy that there's a drop somewhere, but he's too busy being broken at the fronts thanks to that Raven interference matrix and just a nice amount of units straight up. Fantasy is broken, but he was rallying back at home, so if he doesn't lose that many SCVs, he's in an okay position, but this is the scarier position of TVT for Fantasy style of play. He just lost his bit of a contain where ideally I think you decide when to pack it up and go home, and he is down to that army supply, but he has a much better economy. He knows how much faster his third CC was, so he's going to be able to use that given a couple of minutes. But right now he doesn't have stim, he doesn't have combat shields, he doesn't have any upgrades, and his army supply is a little bit less. Viking control, knowledge of where Innovation's army is absolutely key here because you're just very dependent on these tanks. And as you can see, Fantasy is trying to keep tabs of where Innovation's army is. It's just, it's very hard to do, even when you are very diligent about sending one Marine out to each pathway. It's still, you know, sometimes they also are sending out a Marine, right? And with the combat shield upgrade, his Marine, Innovation's Marine would always win. So it's hard to keep track, but he sees that's a good number of tanks, knows where the army is. Now, Fantasy did load up a medevac, and he's going to be doing kind of what Innovation just did to him. And Innovation is doing a bit of an aggressive strategy. I mean that not just because his army's on this side of the map, because he is rallying his units, which is almost a no-no in TVT unless you're very, very confident, which apparently Innovation is. But most of the time, you know, you note this in pro games, they will start just rallying at home. Not because it's easier to take care of, but because Terrans are so damn mobile, right? They got to be everywhere at once. So the drop doesn't go to the third base. It does go into the main, where Innovation was not prepared for it. So he's going to lose out on a few SCVs, really quite a few SCVs. 18, 19, 20 in total. I think Innovation had to pull SCVs when he broke that contain of the natural. So this is just adding on top of that. And this is some really, really, really good damage. It also almost guarantees that Innovation is looking back here as opposed to attempting to break right here. And since Fantasy has the Viking control, he sees how the tanks are still sieged. Innovation has to scan to see if he can break this, as opposed to just having the straight up knowledge. And now we even have Liberators coming out, and Fantasy is playing a fantastic TDT. He seems to really understand, grasp the complications of, specifically in the mid game, I would say. Early game can get convoluted. We'll see people die just like very silly ways, but mid game is usually where you really get to see like, okay, who understands the ebb and flow, and who is just going to be outmatched. And looks like Fantasy understood. At least this game, right? It's a best of 3, so that could change in the next couple of games. But a 4 CC is already on the way. Since Innovation did this, he has not really been focusing so much on his upgrade, so he was super far ahead on his 1-1. He has fallen behind so that they're now very even on their 2-2. Fantasy even has a second tech, factory, sorry, on the way already. This drop survived, so 3 Marines doing very annoying amounts of damage. This drop finds 2 tanks, very nicely done. And just a ton of SCVs as well. Innovation is just kind of wasting time trying to find a 4th base, perhaps building on location, but it wasn't. It's kind of safe up on that high ground, and this game is just going super well for Fantasy, who's lost, killed 32 SCVs, is about to kill the command center. Maybe he should have repaired those SCVs, man. Oh my god, 4-1, no, he doesn't repair it in time. He had just simmed into this to try and break it, instead lost all of his army, so double whammy. Innovation taps out. That was a very good display of TVT from our old boy here. Also former Innovation teammate. They were both on SKT together until it was disbanded. So, but Innovation, it's kind of funny though, Innovation was on SKT and he was a huge reason as to why they did so well in the last year of Pro League, I think it was, maybe last 2 years of Pro League. He was originally on STX Seoul, which not many StarCraft 2 fans know about because it disbanded, well, did it disband? I don't know, it just, yeah, it did, yeah. Yeah, you had the original disbandment of Kespa teams back in Brood War, so like Heights Sparkies or whatever it was. But then you had the second disbanding, which was like Woojing Stars and STX Seoul, and then you had the third disbanding, which was just entirety of Pro League being disbanded. But anyways. Fantasy was SKT since the beginning of his career, I think, whereas Innovation was on a different team. Formerly known as Bogus. Okay, we're on to the next match. Let me just make sure I'm not showing any spoilers here. Okay. This is game number 2, happening on Catalyst. In the top left, he just lost that last game. It is the Red Terran, Innovation. In the bottom right, as the Blue Terran, it is Fantasy. Showing his chops in the TVT matchup at the very least. I don't, as I said, I didn't really get to catch a lot of Home Story Cup, so I don't know how he performed versus Zerg or versus Protoss. I'm not at a loss of what to say. I'm just wondering what to focus on here. There's so much history, I think, with Fantasy being involved in Innovation. I mean, Innovation has cemented himself into StarCraft 2 so that you don't even really think about his time in Brood War, especially because his time in Brood War wasn't that impressive, especially not compared to Fantasy. I think he was a good Terran, and he did play Terran. He didn't race swap. Pretty sure anyways. But he wasn't amazing as far as I can remember, and STX Seoul also just wasn't an amazing team, unfortunately, for any STX Seoul fans out there. So, you know, him getting put up against this guy who was mostly known for his Brood War career, kind of like bringing back memories of what Innovation could do, and I wonder if they both actually did ever talk to each other. I mean, they were in the same team house thing for a little while, so they would have had to at least known about each other, been a little friendly. Did they actually play together back in Kespa days? I don't know. I would not know. But Fantasy was seriously on top of the game at that time, Zhongbi too, and that's why they were the 2 finalists of the last tournament that happened. But it's cool to see that Fantasy returns to StarCraft 2 and not Brood War. I guess as an aside, as Brood War is very popular in Korea. We have leagues upon leagues happening and more leagues happening, more amateur leagues happening. It's very, very cool to see. Streams are very popular, so Fantasy could have easily, I think, made, you know, definitely a couple of bucks streaming on Afrika to his Brood War fans. But instead, after going to military, he does come back to StarCraft 2. Not sure about his decision. I would love to hear his decision if we ever got an interview with him. But either he liked the community more, or he likes the game straight up more. I do feel like, I don't think he has ever interviewed and said that StarCraft 2 fit him better, but there are a few Brood War pros who did say that StarCraft 2 fit them better. Now, at the time, were they just kind of like fluffing up their newfound job because, you know, StarCraft 2 is going to be the career from now on, or they're just trying to make good with Blizzard and they just wanted to say that? I don't know. Or did they actually mean it? I don't know. Were they just having a honeymoon phase because they thought it was a very easy game and then realized, oh shit, it's actually really hard? And that's why they said it fit them more? I have no idea. But I do recall some of the pros saying like, yeah, StarCraft 2 really fits me. And it wouldn't surprise me if Fantasy was one of the ones that said that, because he was always a very micro multitasking type of guy. And certainly Terran StarCraft 2 fits that type of playstyle. And speaking of which, we do have a one base build from Fantasy. So this is relying on his micro multitasking to get him, if not even, then ahead of someone who did go for that command center on the low ground. But Innovation's playing a pretty safe style. He's going for a bunker immediately. He got 2 Reapers and a Cyclone, which can protect him against most things. And then you get the bunker at the front, you get a Raven for any Banshee play, and you're pretty much good to go. This is, if you don't build Cyclones and save a scan or two, and you want to do something else besides Cyclones, this is probably what you're going to do to be the safest in TVT. So, bam, instantly, 2 replays you can look at for if you're struggling in TVT and you just want to be able to get to that damn end game and not die to something stupid. Here it is. Either Cyclone openers or what Innovation's doing here right now. And the bunker is very important in case Fantasy was doing especially Cyclone shenanigans or any dedicated heavy pressure to the front. Banshee can be done with a lot of things, but Raven auto turrets plus Marines to help out, that's one of the easiest ways. Now, Fantasy is expanding. This is not going to stay on one base for very long. But he does want to do a little bit of damage. So, obviously, he wants to even up the workers. He actually got the mule, which is very nice. Grab a second one. That'd be amazing. But you don't want to just even up the workers because you do find yourself behind usually on other things. First of all, double mule. You're behind on that with his riddle not even done. And you're also going to probably find yourself behind a little bit on either production or just amount of... I think production. You're just gonna be behind in production. I mean, it depends really on what the 2-base player, I guess, is doing. Innovation is once again going quicker into the additional bio production, whereas Fantasy is sticking on that 1-1-1 for a continued period. Like, there's definitely, you know, 2 ways to go here, and the third way being mech. But in this case, Innovation is evened up on the worker count. Looks at his income. The income is pretty much evened up too now that 2 mules are gonna be in effect soon. I guess Fantasy doesn't know. Okay, there it is. Fantasy doesn't know what Innovation's doing. It's possible he was going to go for Banshees, but he did see the Raven. But that is another kind of... I mean, this time it wasn't like 2 base. It was like 1.5 base tank attack. Innovation is taking some damage from the Banshee, but it's about what you would expect. At this level, the Banshees, plural, are supposed to do something, even if you have, like, the best counter ever, which Innovation is trying to get. But that tank push at the front, it was scouted. Okay, he went for the repair on the bunker, not the tank. Probably the better move, actually. That tank seemed like it was going to die. No matter what, that interference matrix is going to take out that one tank and then take out the second one. Maybe, no, not quite. And didn't grab the Cyclone and didn't grab the Banshee, but everything is so low. Really, the kicker to this push and Innovation, you know, last game, he just pulled the SCVs, tried to break it once he had stim. And what he thought was a good number of units. That is one way you might have to do it. The other way they would really like to deal with these types of pushes in TVT is just to deal with it before it gets entrenched. And I think that's what Innovation really thought he could do. It didn't work out, so now things are very awkward. And that is the risk you take when you try and just bust it right then and there. Interference Matrix stops the Marines from being shot at, so they kill the Viking. Maybe gonna kill a tank. They are. It gets very awkward when it's this low of number of units, because like 5 Marines and a concave will beat a decent number of tanks if they're really, really spread out. But it looks like with combat shields on the way, +1, enough tanks, yeah, he's going to be able to break this finally. Fantasy is not going to get quite the comfy... I don't want to say he was comfy last game, because it was still kind of a dangerous position for him to be in. But he's not going to get the same situation. The containment didn't last as long. He's not on location. His stim is even farther than it was away from Innovation's last game, and he's not going for a double tech lab, at least not yet. He's still building additional barracks. So really look at this game, and I think Fantasy is very far behind. I know the numbers don't quite reflect that yet, but certainly the position they're both in does. And I think that's why Fantasy also was hoping to do more damage with his opener, and then that push right then and there. Innovation, very clever with the missile turret, but at least Fantasy was paying attention. 100% would have lost that for a lot of other Terran players. Very clever indeed. Gonna grab the gas mining SCVs too, which is probably the most useful SCVs to get, but it is eventually cleaned up. Fantasy does not have knowledge of the incoming push either, and it's just not very... This is the awkward part of the defender, regardless if you're in a good position or not. You just, if you're going for the faster 3rd CC, for instance, you're gonna have, a bit less army supply. In this case, Fantasy just didn't have a very good opener. But at 20 army supply less, you need to know where the army is, and you need to actually have all of your army ready. Spreading your army out like this is great if they're going to kind of be like weak-willed and try and go for 1 drop and then 2 drops. So if this is going to push you, Fantasy needed literally everything on the front line ready to go in order to hold this. So he loses the tank. He does respond very quickly, and Innovation did not have, all these Marines and tanks over the front. He also has 2 medevacs going in the main. If that was all of his Marines, I think Fantasy might have been broken there, but it's also doing well just doing the drop in the main here. Very slow reaction from Fantasy because he doesn't have stim. Also doesn't have combat shields still. So these Marines with medevacs healing them are just outpowering Fantasy's no problem whatsoever. Often in this situation that Fantasy is in, knowing how far behind he was in that tech, you do go for 2 tech labs to get combat shields at the very least at a decent time, but Fantasy did not, and I feel like this drop was a perfect example as to how that can be a problem. This is a good response. You need to keep yourself active in TVT. I mean, there are some builds. Innovation really used to love this very quick 3cc build in this matchup, and he would be very good at defending with it. But for the most part in TVT, the less you are out on the map, the worse the position you in, because you just don't find the abusive situations that your opponent does. You don't find them out of position, they find you out of position type thing. So you need to do something, and that pickup was probably Fantasy's best bet. It might do some damage. It might even, take Innovation's eyes off of his army, so he runs into a bunch of tanks. But it's not happening yet, and the interference matrix actually just might kill Fantasy straight up as he tried to take his 3rd base, but was not prepared to defend it. Even if he had all these Marines over here, that would not have helped. Fantasy just falling behind, basically from the get-go. And while he's doing some okay damage over here, obviously that's not super comparable yet. Unless he got the 3rd CC, and then maybe it would be. But there is not enough production to win this one for Fantasy. If he had a couple tanks, it would be different. One just popped out. But that is not really a base trade army right there for Fantasy. He's just hoping to get something, whereas Innovation's going to get the win. He's not even hoping, he just knows he's going to win this. Oh, but I guess now is a perfect time as any to talk about Fantasy's most defining characteristic. Not his playstyle, not his success in Brood War, but instead his Fantasy GG timing. Thanks for coming back, Fantasy. So, the newcomers, the people who came in with free-to-play, now they know what it means when people say Fantasy GG timing. He was the type of guy who would lift his last building, but not forever. But he would wait until there was a last building and he would lift it, and then he would tap out. Like, sometimes it looked borderline, not BM, but a sort of BM, I guess. He can be very stubborn. So this is obviously a very desperate situation. He didn't kill the 3rd CC. He's not mining from his own natural. Fantasy knows he's very, very far behind, but he believes so strongly in himself that he doesn't tap out of games. So this could still be like a 20-minute game for all I know. That's kind of what he does. Innovation would know this, too. I'm pretty sure his GG timing is infamous across languages. Loved your HUD Plus interview. Thanks, Husky. Yeah, it was a pretty cool setup. I'm a bit disappointed in I mean, I feel like my webcam size was not that badly proportioned, but they did something and it made it badly proportioned, but that's okay. Otherwise, they have a really sick setup, and it's on real TV, which is always cool, but there's the GG. All right, Innovation takes game number 2. So it's all tied up, 1-1. This is always the build to go in TVT. I was talking about giving you 2 standards, this map and the last one, but there's no perfect opening builds in TVT, I would say. Unlike TVZ or TVP, where I think there are builds that can be accommodated. Let's not do that quite yet. Now we can go into the casting. Yeah, I don't think it's quite the same in TVT, since TVT is potentially game ending in every single phase, whereas TVP and TVZ, I feel like unless you're cheesing each other, it usually gets into the mid game. But anyways, it's the last game of this series. The winner of this would just get another point on the board, as it was a what's the word, round robin. There you go, round robin group style, but you know, against certain opponents, it would maybe mean more, and I don't know what the results of this was, or who made it out. Well, I know Innovation made it out, as spoiler alerts, he won Home Story Cup, but I don't know about Fantasy. I don't know how far he got. But let's do the introductions. In the top left was the Red Terran. He is Innovation. In the bottom right is the Blue Terran. It is Fantasy. Why these texts are 2 different fonts? Size? I don't know why. Kind of bothers me though. Doesn't bother you guys? And like one has like an outline, other one doesn't? What's up with that? That's a little bit better. Alright, changing things on the fly. Awesome. There's nothing else happening. There's no early reactor, rather Reaper, or double proxy Reaper. It is just Reaper versus Reaper, and they both are planning on taking a command center. Watch your Pylon Show interview, and I must say it was interesting. Oh, I'm glad you like it. That Pylon Show was really fun. I hope I get invited back someday. The recent Pylon Show was very nice, especially because In Control said I would be good to go to Home Story Cup, which is just that's a real humdinger of a compliment right there. So, I was feeling pretty proud of myself. No, it doesn't bother you? Ah, it bothered me. Anyways, I'll see what YouTube comments have to say. So, I was talking briefly about how there's not really a perfect TVT opener because it does have so many things to adapt to early, mid, and late game. But obviously more towards the early and mid game because that's kind of what build orders are constrained to. But yeah, you can have your safer openers. You can try and be as defensive as possible. But even if you are, even if you are doing the correct amount of defense, so you're not building like 5 bunkers, that's stupid. But if you do like 1 bunker and you get like an engineering bay a little bit later, and just in case they go for a Banshee and cancel any missile turrets that you make, even if you do that, you can still just, you know, they can scout that you're doing that and just be like, oh, okay, I'll get ahead this way. They'll go for a 3rd CC on location, for instance, which is kind of what happened in that first game. So there's just no perfect build in this matchup. You really have to learn and accommodate. You can get yourself into an okay position, I think, on 2 bases with a bunker and a Raven opener to defend against the common attacks. But then what if that person was doing a 1-base tank push and you just don't even scout it coming? I mean, it's complicated. So that's also the beauty of it, though, and why it's much more fun to watch than it is to play, because these guys know what they're doing, both in they know understand TVT on a player level, as well as, you know, they know how to micro and macro perfectly, which TVT gotta be just rocking and rolling the entire time. Whereas in TVZ, maybe you get a little bit more lax in the early to mid game, Same for TVP, maybe not. Depends on what you want to do. TVT, no. It's always on. So Fantasy, I guess, saw Innovation's build and was like, that looks like a good build. Goes for his own Raven this time. I added a Cyclone, though, so he would have had better defense, but not really enough of a change to push across the map. Dreamcatcher, not a very big map, vertical-wise, like base to base, but it is big in, you know, the horizontal-wise from bottom left to top right. So maybe Fantasy could have done something with Cyclone. He obviously didn't want to. Scan was put down in Fantasy's main by Innovation, I guess, as there was very limited scouting for these guys. I mean, about as much as you would expect in a TVT, to be honest, but I don't know. Okay. Fantasy has some good knowledge of what Innovation is doing. That's pretty nice. We got faster stim yet again for Innovation, who's also going for that faster third CC, adding on that barracks. If you can survive any type of push that's happening soon, which Innovation will, because Fantasy's not doing anything, then this is a very good build, I think. You know, the faster you can get stim and a lot of Marines, usually the better you're going to feel in this matchup. As tanks are great and all, but they do require to be in perfect position, and you only have 2 tanks, that's kind of unlikely guarding 2, maybe even 3 bases. So you get the 16 Marines, you get the medevacs and stim faster, you kind of control the matchup a little bit more. That can sometimes feel a lot better than if you're more of the defensive style who gets the sim later and maybe gets a better economy, but can they actually keep it alive? Well, Innovation's going to get the best of both worlds. Fantasy is going to have to try and do something to stop this, and he's going to go for another tank push. They started out so well in game number 1, but I really wonder if it's bound to do well in another game. So I'm kind of glad it looks like Fantasy's just faking it now. He was seriously considering it, but decides not to. I think that might just be the right choice. I mean, always hard decision to make. What if your tank is allowed to get up very close? Maybe they can't break it, maybe they can. It's tough, but it's just Fantasy roaming around with his Cyclone, taking out Marines of Innovation, trying to blind Innovation in this matchup. Very useful thing to do. Liberator also trying to do something, but constantly getting scouted. Fantasy's like, stop it. Stop sending Marines out. Cyclone's gonna die, so that's it of his Marine cleanup squad. But his third CC is at least being built on location, so they really do come together very close as Innovation setting his over. In fact, extremely close, as it'll probably just be ready as Fantasy's orbital is ready. It's pretty perfect. But Stim is still behind, upgrades are still technically behind, but with that type of difference, I don't foresee it being an impact on a match, on a fight. There we go, that's the word. We'll see. Fantasy also, I mean, we see in the last 2 games, even in this game, he almost did a tank push, that he does like these, like, pre-stim tank pushes, and you're gonna do tank push, you usually want to have that Viking control. He likes that type of style of play, which is all well and good, but obviously he's missing some of the, mobility that Innovation gets around this time, 6 to 7 minutes. You get the 2 medevacs, you do a push, you do a double drop, something like that. Fantasy's not getting that. What he's getting, though, is a lot of strong positioning, a lot of strong defensive positions, as well as an ability to snipe down those medevacs. But that interference matrix, once again, so good from Innovation. Fantasy responds with his own, but it's unfortunately a little too late, and he will have to give up his third base, I believe. Not from, no, he's not gonna get it killed, but he will have to stop mining from it. Well, maybe they're not in range of the command center, but they're still denying half the mining, so. All right. Innovation doesn't want to stick around or wants to reposition. I don't quite get that reposition, but so be it. Double medevacs going to the natural base. Barely gonna skirt the vision. Looks like it. And Fantasy's gonna be so focused on this. No, he sees it with a Marine. Of all things, this is hitting when he still has 1-1, and Fantasy does not. Fantasy is also just still dealing with this and not taking the fantastic trades that he would hope for. He's actually just picked up the 16 Marines to go across the map. Not going to quite be a base trade, I'm pretty sure, but it's getting a little wonky. Tank respawns over here along with those Vikings. This is where they really start to shine. They can take out those medevacs, but medevacs just leave. Command center is on fire. That is losing health over time. Oh no, he's repairing it. But that 16 Marine drop has unloaded for Fantasy. Ditto for Innovation, but he lost the medevac. It seems the Vikings did finally chase one of those down. And this Marine's gonna... No, this SCV, my bad. As if he's gonna scout it. Now, he already was rallying back at home. I guess he kind of felt like, where's your army? What are you doing? Did Fantasy have to leave? He would have won the fight, but I guess not enough that it would have mattered. He had equal upgrades, but he had, you know, medevacs. I mean, that, yeah, whatever. Innovation was coming back to respond, and it's, you know, it would have been very likely for him to have a tank or two pop out as well to help. So Fantasy wants to keep this alive as opposed to trying to do damage right now. What it looks like, though, is that it's not going to be kept alive. Never seen someone drop in that little tiny corner, but it does die. That was an awful lot of actions for Innovation to go and kill that, and if there was a strong push up to maybe here, he could have been surprised. Vikings give the vision, snipe the medevacs, maybe get the tanks as well before Innovation realizes it, but he had a defense, he had a sensor tower, and it's Innovation, so he probably would have seen it coming or been able to respond to it quickly enough. That 4cc was something he intended to do before the double drop, so now it's on location. He knows that Fantasy's not quite as eager about that 4th. Fantasy's also fallen way behind in the upgrades. His armory is really very late. That is a direct cause of the pressure he's been under, I'm almost positive. Not necessarily that he took a lot of damage from the pressure, although he did take quite a bit of damage, but I'm pretty sure he just was dealing with so many other things, trying to do so much damage that he didn't get an armory down. Usually a very nitpicky thing to notice, but I can almost guarantee that Fantasy looked at that game and was like, okay, that's one of the things I need to fix. But he also needed to fix, you know, not taking damage at all. So, you know, one step at a time. That it means 2-2 is going to be on the way as 3-3 is for Innovation. Ugh. And, well, you know, tank cover can kind of make up for some upgrade deficits. If you're going to have a straight-up Marine battle, you're just going to get absolutely slaughtered if you're down a full 2 upgrades. That 4cc had very bad timing. Very bad. That was not a cancel, that was a kill. And Fantasy is still down about 50 supply, so he needs all the minerals he can get. He's trying to go back into Vikings. I wonder if Fantasy's making too many Vikings. The thing about Bio versus Bio in this matchup, that is Marine tank versus Marine tank, you only need so many Vikings. I feel like the rule is kind of 4 Vikings, and then if they make Vikings, you also go back into making Vikings, you know? But if they're not making Vikings, then you don't ever want to go above 4, and I would say you don't even really want more than 2 if you can get away with it. But I guess Innovation was starting to make Vikings, so I guess Fantasy is just responding to it. Oh. Oh, no. That's another kill, another cancel. 400 minerals down the drain. The Fantasy is just gonna go for it. Sims right into that 3rd base, bold as hell. There was a sensor tower to see that. That's why Innovation was responding. And Fantasy was just like, okay, time to be decisive. That's gonna win you more games often enough. Just actually deciding what the hell to do. The supply is not looking great, so Innovation temporarily has to give up his 3rd base. He just killed now 1,200 minerals worth of command centers, 2 would-be cancels, and a 3rd, or a natural that was already done. Fantasy is trying to get on top of that production. If you're going to go into a base trade, TVT, the real kicker is getting on top of your opponent's production. If you can do that, then you might just increase your win rates. But Fantasy is denied not just camping the production, he's denied half of his army. He's now down 50 supply. Only 30 army supply, I guess. But in TVT, as long as any of that army supply of the of Innovation is tanks, the 30 supply is enough. That's... It would have to, Innovation would have to run into Fantasy's tanks to try and make up that difference, I think. Or just be caught severely out of position, which is possible. But if Innovation plays a smart game, he rebuilds that center tower. No way Fantasy wins. No way. Fantasy looked very strong in that first game, but it feels like Innovation was just like, oh, okay, that's how you're gonna play, and was able to adapt to it very nicely. Whereas Fantasy did kind of take on the same style of play, which is to say, like, more of the slower stim, more about tank Viking, kind of a more defensive, slower way to play. Innovation just realized it and just started to take control. That was a nice snipe by Fantasy. You want those tanks sieged up to protect the Liberators, and you need to unsiege all of his tanks, but that's one thing of many things that have to happen. Fantasy is just gonna get collapsed upon. He has so few tanks that Innovation seized the opportunity. By the way, didn't note this, but his upgrades are denied. Innovation is 3-3-2 against 1-1-1. That's brutal. That's why this looks so comical. Indevarn, thank you for that Twitch Prime sub. Happy to see you using the Blazer emotes. That's it! Fantasy doesn't do quite the GG timing that he's known for this time, but that is going to result in a 2-1 victory for Innovation. GG. That was a fun TBT. I'm glad to see Fantasy is at least finding his groove again. You know, kind of figuring out what style he might prefer. Maybe he has to start mixing things up in TBT to get in league with the big leaguers, but still looks good. Yeah. They said, I don't know what the results were ultimately. I don't believe Fantasy made it out of groups. But I don't know.